Of 1,451 migratory bird species, 1,324 had inadequate protection for at least one part of their migration pathway. 18 species had no protection in their breeding areas, and 2 species had no protection at all along their whole route. For migratory bird species listed as threatened, less than 3% have sufficient protected areas. Many populations of migratory land bird species that migrate over land distances between and within Africa and Eurasia are particularly vulnerable because they cross the territory of different countries and make these annual and cyclical movements on a broad front. Having a widely dispersed distribution across habitats, there is increasing concern regarding a considerable number of African Eurasian migratory land bird species, especially those that spend the non-breeding season south of the Sahara, that have declining population trends at a national, regional, and/or global level. There is also concern over the lack of knowledge of the status and trends of many migratory land bird species in Africa and Asia. Urgent action is needed to reverse significant population declines.
We have the least concern, we have the vulnerable, we have the near threatened, we have the vulnerable, we have the critically endangered. We have the endangered and the critically endangered. So all those status are put based on the population estimate. And usually these monitoring that we do across these regions is geared towards monitoring their population, so that then they will come up with their population status, which will be able to now tell, okay, this population actually needs, this species need more conservation effort to be put towards it so that they don't go into extinction. We've seen situations whereby their status have been reversed, probably from near threatened to least concern, or from vulnerable to near threatened, or from critically endangered to vulnerable. So there are situations that has happened. So that's why you need to monitor them. So as you monitor them, you'll be able to tell you what stage they are and then what conservation effort needs to be put, because resources are limited.
The annual departure and arrival of migratory birds is a spectacle which arouses emotions in many people and has symbolic meaning in numerous cultures around the world. Many of these birds travel vast distances, crossing several countries and entire continents during their annual migration cycle. Their journeys take them along invisible highways, often stopping at suitable sites along the way to feed, breed, and rest. These international corridors of bird migration, which stretch from the breeding to the non-breeding areas of groups of birds, are referred to as flyways. Changes at one site may have a detrimental effect on the success of the bird's completion of their migration cycle and an effect on their survival. Conservation of migratory bird species must therefore aim at conserving all important sites found on the flyways. In addition, conservation efforts made by states and other actors are more effective if they are coordinated at the flyway scale. The need to conserve and manage all critical sites on a given flyway across borders is now recognized and called the flyway approach to conservation. Flyway conservation aims at conserving the important sites migratory bird species require along their entire migratory range. It recognizes that international cooperation is essential to ensure that migratory birds find the necessary resources and sites they need along their entire flyway to complete their annual journeys. It calls upon states and the international conservation community to work together to understand the problems migratory birds encounter throughout their life cycle, and encourages countries to cooperate to sustainably protect and manage populations of these species. The concept provides the overall framework for this international cooperation and has evolved into a broad policy framework encouraging international cooperation between governments and non-governmental organizations towards the transboundary international flyway scale conservation of migratory birds. The flyway concept has been applied in various parts of the world for different groups of migratory bird species and geographical regions. It continues to be a valuable concept in formulating international conservation policy for the protection of migratory birds and the networks of critical sites upon which they depend. With the advent of legally binding multilateral treaties such as the Convention on Migratory Species and the African Eurasia Migratory Waterbird Agreement, as well as several other formal and informal international agreements and memoranda of understanding. The concept has proved valuable in focusing attention on strategic needs for migrating birds within defined geographical regions. In addition, several other international organizations, both governmental and non-governmental, are directly or indirectly applying the concept and are working to improve the flyway level conservation of migratory birds and the critical for water birds, mostly wetland sites they depend on. For example, the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. The Convention on Wetlands, called the Ramsar Convention, is an international treaty that provides the framework for national action and international cooperation for the conservation and wise use of wetlands and their resources. The convention entered into force in Nigeria on the 2nd of February 2001. Nigeria currently has 11 sites designated as wetlands of international importance, with a surface area of over 1 million hectares.
Hadejanguru wetlands, which is a very important stopover for birds migrating through over the Sahara Desert. Then you have the East Atlantic Flyway, where you have birds migrating along the coastline of Africa, right from Europe, as I mentioned. So the wetlands, at least in Nigeria, that we've done so far, there are some threats that are going on quite all right on the wetlands. We have sand dredging, sand mining. Dredging is going on. We have the destruction of the mangrove ecosystem, which is not very good. And we have sometimes agricultural activities as well that are happening, which are destroying our mangrove. But so far, what we have is something that we can say our wetlands are still good for the birds.
Naturally, functioning wetlands provide a range of benefits and services for people's livelihoods and well-being, including food, fiber, flood protection, water purification, and support for cultural values. Wetlands are extremely rich in biodiversity. Water birds such as herons, egrets, swans, ducks and geese, and waders use wetlands during the majority of their lifetime. At least 12% of all globally threatened birds, 146 species of them, depend on wetlands. The most important types of wetlands for these birds are lakes and pools, rivers and streams, bogs, marshes, and swamps.